Hello, thank you for stopping by. I am Oana Gurau from the University of Oxford, and for the next 5 minutes, I will be talking about orienting attention in short-term and long-term memory across aging. Attention can be flexibly deployed to both external stimuli and internal representations stored in memory. Typically, this is demonstrated using retrospective cues or retro cues, which guide prioritization and selection within the mnemonic content. So far, this effect has been shown only in short-term memory. In this project, we investigated, firstly, whether we observe retrocueing benefits on performance in long-term memory, how similar attention-orienting mechanisms may operate within long-term memory compared to short-term memory, and lastly, whether we observe similar mechanisms of use across aging. For this purpose, we designed two novel tasks that allowed us to assess memories of different time spans in analogous ways. In the short-term memory task, participants had to remember the identities and locations of two objects presented on a scene. During the delay, they were either presented with a neutral or a spatially informative retro cue. This indicated which side of the screen the target object was on, so whether it was on the left or the right side of the screen. Participants were then probed by a choice of two objects and had to pick the object previously associated with the scene, and then they had to drag it to the remember location. The three measures of interest were identification accuracy, identification reaction time, and localization error, which is the Euclidean distance between the correct target location and the participant's response. We were able to replicate previous retrocueing benefits on performance. We showed that retro cues significantly improve reaction times in both young and elderly participants. Younger participants performed better than elderly on all measures, but orienting benefits were equivalent. In the long-term memory task, participants performed a search task first. Just like in the short-term memory task, two objects were presented within a series of scenes, but now participants had to search for and locate them, creating novel object scenes associations. The results validated the effectiveness of the learning task. We found improved identification and localization reaction times across the three learning blocks. This effect is mainly driven by the amount of learning achieved by the elderly participants after the first block. Additionally, young participants performed better than elderly participants. 20 minutes after the learning task, participants completed an explicit recall test, similar in structure to the short-term memory task. The difference is that in the long-term memory task, a scene without the objects first appeared. Then, just like for the short-term memory task, followed a neutral or a valid spatial retrocue, and then a choice of two items. The valid retrocue indicated which side of the screen the target object was on. Participants selected the item associated with a scene in long-term memory and dragged it to its original position. This task allowed us to analyze and compare the same measures for both long and short-term memory. Here, we demonstrated that long-term memory retrieval also benefits from retrocues. Both age groups showed significantly lower localization errors for retrocue trials. Additionally, we also replicated the age effect, observing better performance for young compared to elderly participants. Orienting benefits were equivalent. Lastly, we looked at the relationship between short and long-term memory performance. We calculated the validity effect for all three measures of performance by subtracting neutral from retrocue trials, aiming to analyze the relationship between the two memory mechanisms. We then plotted the validity effect for short-term memory against the validity effect in long-term memory for all three measures of performance. Our results show performance benefits of orienting attention for the precision of localizing objects based in short-term and long-term memory were positively correlated for young participants. To wrap up, our findings importantly show benefits of retrocueing for long-term memory retrieval. We therefore demonstrate that there are similarities in attention-orienting mechanisms for memories of different time spans. Lastly, we conclude that the ability to orient attention and memory is relatively preserved in aging despite any other deficits linked to memory performance. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions.